Mark Latham is a legislative councillor in New South Wales for One Nation. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
A pleasure. Thanks, Ricky.
Now, we're picking up across the board about looking in your own home state of New South Wales about these shortages in professions like teaching, and you've made the point on social media, well, there's plenty of teachers willing to work if their vaccination status was reconsidered by the government.
Unfortunately, in New South Wales, there have been 7,000 teachers sacked or stood down because of their vaccination status, and this comes at a time of an absolute crisis in the number of teachers in our schools. We've got schools that are reducing their teaching hours. They close earlier in the day. We've got schools where the kids are left in the playground without supervision or told to go to the library and read a book instead of having a classroom teacher. So I would have thought when in New South Wales, parents don't need to be vaccinated now to attend a school. A parent can go to a parent-teacher night without having to demonstrate vaccination status, but the teacher needs to. So that's a massive inconsistency. It's time to end these mandates, get the 7,000 back in front of students in classrooms teaching and delivering a full day of education.
And we spoke to the Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook, recently about even volunteers within the Rural Fire Service arrangements have been asked, they've been told they can't participate in helping fight fires if they're not fully vaccinated under the terminology of, I think it's 2 doses. But there was about 20% of brigades said, look, we couldn't function if that was put in place.
Well, it's a real problem that the RFS, which not only looks after bushfires, but also helps in other emergency circumstances like these floods that are across New South Wales, we're minimising the number of volunteers who can actually help their fellow citizens in time of need. And this is outdoor work. It's not like they're inside in cramped spaces. The RFS is outdoor work with fires and other emergency circumstances, so it just seems to be an unnecessary mandate for people who want to help out. They're volunteers, they want to do the right thing, and regardless of their health status and health choices, for outdoor work, they should be allowed to participate.
Now, you would know from your political history when it comes to unions, they can be good advocates for workers, but the New South Wales Teachers Union, back on the teachers topic, they don't seem to be wanting to advocate for those unvaccinated workers to get back to work, and yet the South Australian Police Unions managed to get their coppers back at work. The police in SA have dropped their vaccine mandate.
Well, that's good to hear. That's common sense. Unfortunately, in New South Wales, all the unions have sold out. They've taken the membership fees from their members, whether they're teachers or fireys or police, and they haven't lifted a finger to try and remove these mandates to stop people from being sacked. Now, the first job for any union is to represent their members at a time when those members are being dismissed or stood down. And for the Teachers Federation in New South Wales to be protesting about teacher shortages, they're actually protesting against themselves, because they've done nothing. In fact, they've actively supported the mandates that have sacked or stood down 7,000 teachers, many of them former members of the Teachers Federation.
And there's people, whether they're teachers or police officers, even nurses. I mean, we've heard about shortages in regional nursing in New South Wales as well. They've left wondering, well, if the union won't advocate for me, what do I do?
Well, they're setting up alternative associations in all these professional areas. There are new bodies forming, and at a time when union coverage in Australia has dropped below 15%, you would have thought that the unions would fight this, the established unions, but instead people are having to turn to alternative associations, and no one can blame them for that. It was a long-standing principle that unions actually fought for, that workers determine their own health choices, not their bosses. That was something unions thought they'd bedded down, but come to COVID and the vaccine mandates, the unions have rolled over. I'm glad to hear the Police Association in South Australia is standing up for their members, and other unions should do the same. Otherwise, people will just go join these other associations.
And lastly, Mark, just because it comes to mind with your history involved in federal politics previously, when it comes to Mr Albanese saying he's going to, if he gets elected, operate like a Hawke government, what do you make of those comments?
Well, I knew Anthony Albanese when he went to every Labor Party conference to complain very loudly about all the Hawke and Keating government policies. He said they weren't left-wing enough, they sold out the workers, they weren't true Labor values, and he said, massive criticism also of John Howard. So for 40 years, he's been complaining about the things that he now says he embraces as a model for the future, this is a backflip with triple pike, the like of which we haven't seen before in Australian politics. And I just think that the voters are starting to get the impression that Anthony Albanese is just not fair dinkum.
All right, Mark Latham, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your comments on those issues for workers across not just New South Wales but across the states we broadcast in. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. We're fighting for those workers everywhere in every state. I know you've got an election there in South Australia, and I hope people vote for the parties that are standing up for these sacked workers.